Inversions is the next topic, and basic inversions. We'll start with just putting the root and the third and the fifth, possibly the seventh as the bass note. When the seventh is the bass note, it tends to not necessarily sound like the same chord. For instance, take a B7 and you put a seventh in the bass. Like the tune The Waters of March. It's a pretty sound, sounds more suspended than inverted, and that's often the effect of an inversion. When you're dealing with seventh chords, you'll have a minor 7 chord. If you play the first inversion of that chord, it's a major 6 chord. So it has a different effect. Talking about inversions, we take the typical progression that's in a million tunes, but often associated with autumn leaves. So instead of just using root position on this very popular progression, one that goes back to George Friedrich Handel, Bach used almost identical progression on several of his compositions. It follows the circle of fifths counterclockwise, as many jazz tunes do. So, but a lot of pop tunes follow this as well, like I Will Survive and others. And if you're just playing it in root position, you've got typical jazz tune, 2-5-1-4, right, and then a 2-5-1 in minor. If I put inversions on there, it tends to sound a little better with more of a bossa feel, Latin feel. Starting with this first inversion, A minor, alternating with a third inversion, and I'll keep going back and forth. Circle of fifths progressions will lend themselves to alternating the same two inversions. First, third, first, third, first, third, first. Suddenly it sounds like a different tune, and you could try that with any inversion on any progression. Try seeing how different it can sound simply by inverting the chord. You could come up with a completely new tune by taking an existing progression and using inversions, and that can be fun. In the pop world, there have been several artists who have used inverted chords very effectively. A lot of times in pop music, you'll hear a descending bass line that goes right down the scale, and you think, oh, they're playing the 1 chord, the 7 chord, the 6 chord, the 5 chord, the 4 chord, the 3 chord, the 2 chord, and the 1 chord. But they're not usually. More often than not, and it can be a combination, but more often than not, they're playing the 1 chord, then they're playing the 5 chord in first inversion, then the 4 chord in first inversion, and then the 5 chord in root position, or oftentimes they'll play the 1 chord in second inversion because it has the 5 in the bass. Then the 4 chord in root position, then the 1 chord in first inversion, and then the 5 chord in second inversion, adding a 7th there, and then the 1 chord in root position. Okay. And that's usually what you hear in a pop tune. It's just the 1, 4, and the 5 chord, using inversions, but the moving bass line, I like tunes that have those, and some that do that include Eric Clapton tunes, Elton John tunes, Sting again, the Police, some modern jazz writers like Pat Metheny with Lyle Mays, Steve Swallow. Being a bass player like Sting, he builds a lot of tunes from the bottom up, and so they are thinking about that moving bass line. And taking a bass line, descending bass line, and composing using that approach is something I've often done, not necessarily using inversions, but just kind of trying to have a bass line that moves stepwise, and it creates good voice leading for the rest of the chords above it if you use inversions effectively. Generally speaking, you can use good voice leading, but the bass is allowed to leap around a little bit more. Try having the bass be smooth and moving as little as possible, specifically in a direction, never more than a whole step if possible, and you create a different sound. Variation using inversions starts with the 5th in the bass, putting a 9th in there, then the 3rd in the bass, and the 3rd in the bass again. Now there's a 6 in the melody. The 6 in those chord analysis beneath the chord symbols and beneath the melody, that's from traditional classical analysis. A 6 means it's a first inversion chord. That's because the interval between the bass note and the root of the chord. When you put the 3rd in the bass, it becomes a 6th below that. And the numbers have to do with the intervals above the bass note that the root of the chord is. And there's lots of reasons why this told accompanists, harpsichordists usually, what chord voicing they should play. But they were great improvisers. And so it was not all written out for them. They just had these chord symbols. So 6-4 means a second inversion triad. 6-5 means a first inversion 7th chord, and 4-3 a second inversion, and 4-2 a third inversion 7th chord. So that's just a little overview of that. Plenty of places you can find out what those things mean. After my 1, 4, 5, then I add a 3 chord, leaving a B in the bass, then a 6 chord with a 3 in the bass, and then a 4 chord again, but leaving that C in the bass, which is now the 5th of that chord. And then it goes down to E minor, then A, then G, then A, right? And that's kind of fun. The add 9, the F add 9 over A, we'll hear more of that chord later in the course. But that's the 3rds in the bass, so I don't need to put it in the upper part of the chord. And it's nice, you can take a 2-chord progression like this, if I wanted to, and just keep alternating those 2 chords with 6 different sounds, because I can have 6 different bass notes with the root 3rd and the 5th in the bass for each of them. Going on to the next part of the tune, and I haven't changed the chords from the original composition, I'm just putting them all in inversions. So when we had a 2, 5, 1, 4, and then I did change things there because I ended up making it that autumn leaves progression, just in a different key. And then I put the 7th in the bass, so 3rd inversion, then 1st inversion, then 3rd inversion, then 1st inversion, then 3rd inversion, then 1st inversion, then 3rd inversion, then 3rd inversion to bring us us back to C major again. Now I put an E in the bass there. It was G at the beginning of the tune, but it sounded better coming from this chord to go to E in the bass. I can't really play this as a chord melody. Maybe here. Can't get all the notes. I can, but I'd have to practice. Or I could put the F here. Hey, see? The things you learn. Kind of like a different tune. So you try the same thing with not necessarily your own composition. There's any tune out there you can see, wow, how would this sound if these chords were in inversions?